The HOA thought dry land meant free land. They built fences, cabins, fire pits, even a fake marina inside my reservoir basin. Then they called the cops when I showed up with the original flood maps. I didn't threaten anybody. I just unlocked the gatehouse my grandfather built in 1951. If you enjoy stories about stubborn ranchers, buried paperwork, and quiet justice, stick around and subscribe. Celeste Holloway was standing on my grandfather's spillway at 6:12 in the morning, screaming over the wind like the dam belonged to her. You touch those controls, Elias Mercer, and my HOA will have the sheriff here before that rusted gate even moves. She wore white gloves, polished boots, and the kind of expensive jacket people buy when they want to look outdoorsy without ever getting mud on their hands. Behind her, the dry basin stretched wide and gray under the early light. 94 luxury cabins sat below us in neat rows, cedar walls, stone chimneys, glass decks, facing what their brochures called future lake views. Future lake views. That was the lie they had sold. I looked past Celeste to the old waterline carved into the granite ridge. My grandfather had marked that line in 1951, back when Mercer Reservoir held enough water to float fishing boats, irrigate hayfields, and cool the valley through August. The cabins weren't beside my lake. They were inside it. Celeste jabbed a finger at my chest. This land has been dry for decades. Your family abandoned it. Pinnacle Ridge improved it. That makes it community use property. I almost laughed, but anger has a way of turning quiet when it gets old enough. No, Mrs. Holloway, I said. Dry doesn't mean abandoned. Low water doesn't erase a flood easement. Her face tightened. Don't use engineer talk on me. That's not engineer talk. That's property law. She stepped closer, perfume cutting through the smell of cold concrete and rust. My homeowners paid good money for those cabins. They have deeds, access agreements, and HOA approvals. They have papers from people who didn't own the basin. Her smile came back sharp and practiced. Then take us to court. I rested one hand on the steel guardrail. The dam trembled faintly beneath us, not from water, but from age, wind, and the old machinery waiting below the gatehouse. I don't need court to operate my own dam. That was when her confidence slipped. Just a fraction. Just enough. Below us, a black SUV rolled through the cabin road, followed by two pickups with contractor racks. Men in branded Pinnacle Ridge jackets were unloading patio furniture onto decks that would be underwater if the reservoir ever returned to design pool. One of them waved at Celeste. She lifted a hand without looking away from me. You're threatening families, she said. I warned them. You sent one ridiculous letter. I sent 3 certified notices. Your office refused 2. You sent harassment disguised as legal nonsense. I sent the expiration date. The wind dragged silence between us. Celeste narrowed her eyes. What expiration date? I pulled a folded copy from inside my jacket and held it out. She didn't take it, so I opened it myself. The paper snapped in the wind. The federal drought variance keeping Mercer Reservoir 11 feet below full pool expires in 10 days. After that, the reservoir returns to its legal operating elevation. She blinked once. That variance is temporary? It always was. Her mouth moved, but no words came. For the first time that morning, she looked down at the cabins instead of at me. The basin was waking up under the sunrise. Dust moved in pale sheets across the dry lake floor. Porch lights glowed on cabins that had no right to stand there. Somewhere below, a generator coughed to life. It sounded small against all that empty land. Celeste snatched the paper from my hand, scanned the first page, then shoved it back at me like it had burned her. My husband's lawyers will bury you. Your husband sold lakefront lots in a reservoir basin. You hillbilly engineer. That one landed softer than she meant it to. I'd heard worse from men with more dirt under their nails. I turned toward the gatehouse and unlocked the outer inspection panel. The brass key was older than I was, worn smooth from my grandfather's hand, then my father's, and now mine. Celeste grabbed her phone. "I'm calling the sheriff." "Good," I said. "Tell him to bring the county records." She stared at me, waiting for fear. I gave her none. They wait. And in 10 days, every person in Pinnacle Ridge was going to find out why a man would calmly warn people before flooding his own lake. I left the spillway just after sunrise and drove the old ranch road back toward the Mercer house. Dust rolled behind my truck in pale clouds while the reservoir basin stretched beside me, dry and wrong. The cabins looked clean and expensive from a distance, but once you knew where the original shoreline sat, the whole development started looking like a graveyard built in the middle of a riverbed. My father Harold was already awake when I walked into the kitchen. He sat at the table, wearing the same brown ranch coat he'd worn for 20 years, one hand wrapped around a coffee mug, the other resting on a folded newspaper he hadn't read yet. The arthritis in his knuckles had stiffened badly the past few winters, but his eyes were still sharp. "She finally came up to the dam?" he asked. "Bright and early. How loud? Loud enough to wake Granddad." That got half a smile out of him. I poured coffee and stood by the sink while he watched me quietly. My father had spent most of his life avoiding conflict. Ranchers around here respected him because he never raised his voice unless something truly mattered. This mattered. "She threatened lawsuits again?" he asked. "Lawyers, sheriff, HOA, same speech as always." Harold nodded slowly like he'd expected every word. After breakfast, we drove out along the eastern ridge in his old ranch Jeep, bouncing through dry grass and sagebrush until we reached the basin edge. The cabins sat below us in perfect rows, sunlight flashing off metal roofs and oversized windows. Harold stared at them for a long time. "When I was 12, he said quietly, your grandfather anchored a fishing dock right there." He pointed directly at cabin 27. Water used to sit 20 feet deep in that spot. I looked at the cabin again. Adirondack chairs on the porch, a kayak rack mounted beside the stairs. Somebody had hung decorative lanterns along the rail, all sitting inside a reservoir easement. Harold tapped the dashboard. "Take me to the barn." The metal filing cabinet sat in the back corner beneath shelves full of rusted tools and old branding irons. My grandfather bought the cabinet in 1953 from a closing hardware store in Billings. The paint had faded from green to gray decades ago. Harold handed me a ring of keys, bottom drawer sticks. It took both hands to force it open. Inside sat 30 years of reservoir records bundled in cracked folders and tied with twine. Inspection reports, survey maps, old engineering notes. I spread everything across the workbench while dust floated through the barn light. Then I found the federal document, Bureau of Reclamation. August 1974. Temporary drought mitigation variance approved for Mercer Reservoir, pending regional water recovery conditions. I read the first paragraph twice. The government had authorized the reservoir to remain 11 feet below full pool during the drought crisis of the 70s. Temporary operational reduction, renewable every 10 years. But the flood easement remained fully intact. My pulse slowed. That detail mattered more than anything. A lowered lake wasn't a dead lake. Legally, the basin still belonged to the reservoir. Every inch below full pool remained protected under the original easement my grandfather filed in 1951. The cabins weren't near Mercer Reservoir. They were inside it. I kept reading until another line stopped me cold. Restoration to design elevation permitted upon expiration or termination of variance conditions. No hearing requirement. No redevelopment exemption. No HOA protections. Harold watched my face carefully from across the barn. "You found it, didn't you?" I looked up slowly. "You knew." I remembered enough to know the waterline never changed. "Why didn't you fight them earlier?" He rubbed one weathered hand across his jaw. "Because your mother was sick. Because I got tired. Because I kept thinking somebody from that development would eventually bother checking the county records before building 94 cabins in a reservoir basin. Outside, wind rattled the loose tin along the barn roof. I spread the survey maps wider across the table. Old brass elevation marks matched perfectly with the cabin layouts from Pinnacle Ridge brochures. Cabin 14 sat 6 feet below legal pool. Cabin 51 sat nearly 9. The entire western section was doomed if the lake returned, and then I saw something worse. A signature. Russ Holloway. Developer approval acknowledgement. Attached beside a county survey overlay. Dated almost 3 years earlier. I stared at the paper while a slow anger settled into my chest. The developer knew. The whole damn time he knew. Outside the barn, tires crunched across gravel. Harold looked toward the open door. A black SUV had stopped near the ranch gate. 2 men stepped out wearing Pinnacle Ridge security jackets, and both of them were walking toward the barn. The taller one carried a clipboard, like it gave him authority. The second man kept scanning the property with mirrored sunglasses and the kind of stiff posture private security guys learn after 3 weekends of training. I slid the survey maps back into the filing cabinet before they reached the door. "Morning," the tall one said. "We're here regarding several reports from Pinnacle Ridge residents about threatening behavior." Harold let out a dry laugh behind me. "Threatening behavior? On my ranch?" The guard ignored him and looked at me instead. "Mr. Mercer, residents are concerned you intend to sabotage community property." "Community property?" I repeated. "The reservoir basin." I stepped aside just enough for them to see the stacks of maps and engineering files on the workbench. "This basin belongs to the Mercer Reservoir, flood easement recorded with Gallatin County in 1951. The second guard finally spoke. "Our legal department says otherwise. Your legal department sold cabins inside a reservoir. That hit harder than I expected." The tall guard's jaw tightened. "We're advising you not to interfere with lawful residential development." "You mean unlawful?" The clipboard shifted nervously in his hands. "Mr. Mercer, escalating this situation could expose you to major civil liability." "No," I said quietly. 94 cabins below legal waterline exposure does that." For a second, nobody moved. Then the second guard spotted the old survey overlays sticking from the cabinet drawer. "That county material?" he asked. "Sure is." He looked at his partner. Something passed silently between them that told me everything I needed to know. They weren't here to warn me. They were here to see what I had found. I stepped forward until both men backed toward the barn entrance. "You can tell Celeste Holloway and Russ Holloway something for me," I said. "I'm done sending polite letters." The taller guard forced a smile. "You threatening the HOA now?" "No, I'm informing them." I shut the filing cabinet hard enough to echo through the barn. The guards left without another word. Harold waited until the SUV disappeared down the ranch road before speaking. "They know." "Yeah," I said, "and they're scared." That afternoon, the HOA emails started. My phone buzzed nonstop while I sat at the kitchen table scanning old reservoir records into digital files. Neighbors from town forwarded screenshots from Pinnacle Ridge community groups. "Attention residents. Elias Mercer is attempting to weaponize outdated environmental claims against our community." Another one called me an unstable former government engineer. One post accused me of trying to extort homeowners into buying fake lake permits. By sunset, somebody had posted my photo online beside the words, "Stop the Mercer flood threat." Harold stared at the screen and shook his head slowly. "Your grandfather built that reservoir during the drought of 51, he said. "Now these people act like you stole it from them." I didn't answer. Because what bothered me wasn't the insults. It was how organized everything felt. The security visit, the HOA messaging, the speed of the social media campaign. Russ Holloway wasn't panicking anymore. He was managing damage. That evening, I drove down into the basin itself for the first time in months. Kids rode bicycles past million-dollar cabins built on compacted lake mud. Decorative signs pointed toward future marina access, that legally could never exist. Contractors hammered deck railings, while realtors in fleece vests walked buyers through open houses. One realtor stood beside cabin 18 speaking to a couple near a black Mercedes SUV. "You'll have permanent waterfront value here," she said confidently. "The Mercer issue is just noise from an angry local rancher." I stopped my truck 20 feet away. The realtor recognized me immediately. Her smile vanished. The husband looked between us awkwardly. "You Elias Mercer?" "Yeah." He nodded toward the basin. "You really planning to flood this place?" I looked directly at the cabin behind him. Waterline marker on the original survey sat almost halfway up the porch columns. "I'm planning to operate a legal reservoir," I said. The realtor jumped in fast. "The HOA already resolved those claims." "No," I said calmly. The HOA ignored them. The wife frowned. "Wait, this used to be underwater?" Nobody answered. Wind pushed dust across the basin road while silence settled over the group. Then the husband looked back at the cabin again. Really looked at it this time. That was the first crack. Not lawsuits, not threats, doubt. And once doubt gets into a development built on lies, the whole thing starts sinking long before the water arrives. That night, I sat alone on the Mercer porch with the old survey maps spread across my knees. 94 cabins, 94 lawsuits waiting to happen. And somewhere inside Pinnacle Ridge, Russ Holloway was trying to figure out exactly how much I knew. I intended to make that answer very expensive. The next morning, I drove to Bozeman with 3 banker boxes full of reservoir records strapped into the back seat of my truck. The Mercer files smelled like dust, machine oil, and old paper. 40 years of inspections, flood maps, survey elevations. Every decade, the federal drought variance had been renewed, and every renewal repeated the same sentence. Temporary reduction does not alter the original flood easement. Diane Keller's office sat above a feed supply store on Main Street. Mounted elk antlers hung behind her desk beside framed water rights maps covering half the state. She looked more like a ranch foreman than an attorney. Gray hair tied back, denim shirt, reading glasses low on her nose. She didn't waste time shaking hands. "You brought the reservoir case?" she asked. I set the boxes down. 94 cabins inside a flood easement. That got her attention. For the next hour, she barely spoke. She spread the survey maps across a long oak table and worked through them with colored pencils, county overlays, and a legal pad already covered in notes. Finally, she leaned back slowly. "Well," she said, almost smiling, "this is catastrophic. For me or for them. For whoever approved construction." She pointed toward the original 1951 flood survey. "Your grandfather recorded this correctly. Full pool elevation is legally tied to the easement boundary. That means every structure below this line exists at the mercy of reservoir operations." I crossed my arms. "Celeste says the lake's abandoned." Diane gave a dry laugh. "A lowered reservoir isn't abandonment. Otherwise, every drought lake in the western United States would turn into free real estate." She flipped to the federal variance agreement from 1974. Then she stopped, completely stopped. The room went quiet except for traffic outside. "There it is," she said softly. "What?" She rotated the document toward me and tapped a paragraph buried near the bottom of page 3. "Upon expiration of temporary drought variance, Mercer Reservoir shall automatically return to federally recognized operational pool elevation without requirement for additional state hearing or county review." I read it twice, then a third time. "No approval process?" I asked. "None." Diane removed her glasses slowly. "Elias, the law already decided this 50 years ago." Something cold settled into place inside my chest. All this time, I'd expected a fight over permission. There wasn't going to be one. The reservoir had already won. Diane stood and walked to a filing cabinet beside the window. She pulled out a Montana land use code book, thick enough to stop a truck tire. "You know what makes this worse?" she asked. "They knew?" Oh, they absolutely knew. She dropped another document onto the table. Gallatin County Planning Review. 3 years old. Developer Acknowledgement Section signed by Russ Holloway. Potential flood easement, overlap, requires independent legal verification before construction approval. I stared at his signature. Same signature from the survey packet in my barn. Russ Holloway hadn't missed the easement. He ignored it. Diane sat back down and folded her hands. Your developer gambled that nobody in your family would ever restore the reservoir. And if I do, 94 cabins become evidence. The room stayed quiet for several seconds. Outside, somebody honked on Main Street. Somewhere downstairs, a forklift rattled through the feed warehouse. Normal sounds. Meanwhile, an entire luxury development was sitting inside a legal disaster zone. Diane opened a fresh folder and wrote Holloway Development across the tab in black marker. First thing we do, she said, is stop this from becoming a public relations circus before we control the facts. Too late for that. Not yet. She began organizing papers into separate stacks with frightening speed. Second thing, she continued, is we establish a clean legal timeline, certified notices, recorded service, dam operation compliance, county coordination. You sound excited. She looked up at me for the first time in almost an hour. Mr. Mercer, I've spent 22 years fighting developers who thought paperwork mattered less than money. A small smile touched the corner of her mouth. I've been waiting a very long time for somebody dumb enough to build an HOA inside a reservoir. By noon, she had drafted the notice. Formal evacuation advisory. 90 days to remove all structures below legal flood elevation. At the bottom sat Diane Keller's signature beside mine. She slid the papers across the desk. Once this gets served, she said, they stop dealing with a rancher. I picked up the notice. They start dealing with the lake. Diane nodded once. Then she smiled at the map again. By the time I got back to the ranch, the notice had already been delivered electronically to every attorney attached to Pinnacle Ridge Estates. And Celeste Holloway lost her mind exactly the way Diane predicted she would. 3 sheriff patrol trucks were parked outside my front gate before sunset. Half the HOA had gathered along the county road behind them, standing beside luxury SUVs with phones raised, like they were filming a wildfire. Somebody had brought printed signs. Save our homes. Stop the Mercer flood. One sign simply read, Water Terrorist. I parked beside the cattle guard and stepped out slowly. Dust swirled around my boots while cameras turned toward me all at once. Celeste stood near the lead patrol truck in a cream-colored coat, sunglasses hiding half her face even though the sun was dropping behind the ridge. There he is, she announced loudly. The man threatening to destroy an entire community. I shut my truck door without answering. Deputy Shane Walker climbed out of the nearest patrol SUV before the situation could get louder. I'd known Shane since high school football. He looked exhausted already. Elias, he said quietly, mind talking over here? We walked a few feet away from the crowd. Behind us, Celeste kept talking for the cameras. He's weaponizing environmental law against innocent families. Shane rubbed one hand across his jaw. You really planning to reopen the reservoir? Yes. You have authority? I have recorded easement rights, federal variance expiration, and 50 years of inspection reports. His eyes shifted toward the crowd. You know, the county reviewed some of those records already that stopped me. When? 2 years ago. During Holloway development permitting. Cold anger moved through me slowly. And, Shane lowered his voice further. County engineers flagged the flood easement overlap. Recommendation was further legal review before development approval. But construction kept going. He nodded once. Russ Holloway pushed it through anyway. Across the road, Celeste spotted us talking and started marching over immediately. Deputy Walker, she snapped. I want him formally warned. These threats are causing emotional distress to homeowners. I looked at her calmly. I sent legal notice. You sent extortion letters. I sent evacuation timelines. A murmur rolled through the crowd behind her. People were listening now. That mattered. Celeste pointed toward the basin. Those cabins are legally deeded residences, inside a flood easement. You keep saying that like it means something. It means the water has prior claim. She laughed loudly for the cameras. There is no water. I stared at her for a long moment. Then I pointed toward the mountains north of the basin. See the snowpack up there? Her smile faded slightly. The tributaries feeding Mercer Reservoir never stopped existing, I said. The lake's been held 11 feet low under federal drought variance since 1974. 10 days from now that variance expires. One homeowner near the patrol trucks frowned. Wait, expires. Celeste spun toward him instantly. Don't listen to him, too late. Doubt was spreading again, and doubt moves through wealthy neighborhoods faster than wildfire. Deputy Walker cleared his throat awkwardly. Mrs. Holloway, county records do confirm an active flood easement attached to Mercer Reservoir. The silence after that hit harder than shouting. Several people lowered their phones. One man actually stepped backward away from Celeste. Her face tightened so hard, I thought her teeth might crack. You're siding with him now? I'm stating what's on file. She turned toward the crowd immediately. This is intimidation, all of it. But the confidence in her voice was slipping, because for the first time, somebody besides me had confirmed the reservoir records publicly. A woman near the back called out nervously, "Can our cabins actually flood?" Nobody answered fast enough. That was answer enough. Celeste recovered quickly and pointed directly at me. If one drop of water touches those homes before court review, my attorneys will own everything your family has left. I stepped closer to her, close enough that the cameras caught every word. Mrs. Holloway, I said quietly, your husband sold lakefront property inside a reservoir basin. You should be a lot more worried about your attorneys than mine. Her expression cracked. Only for a second, but it cracked. Then, thunder rolled across the mountains behind the reservoir. Everybody heard it. Everybody looked toward the basin. And for the first time since this started, some of the homeowners looked afraid of the land itself. That night, the patrol trucks finally left around 9. The protesters cleared out slowly after them. But around midnight, I woke to the sound of metal slamming somewhere behind the ranch house. I grabbed the flashlight beside my bed and looked out toward the barn. The side door was hanging open, and somebody was inside. I crossed the yard fast, flashlight in one hand, the old iron gate key still hanging from the hook beside the porch where I'd left it earlier. The barn lights were off, but I could hear metal scraping somewhere near the workbench. Sheriff's already been called, I said loudly as I stepped through the doorway. Silence. Then footsteps. A figure bolted through the rear of the barn, knocking over a crate of old tools on the way out. By the time my flashlight caught the open back door, all I saw was taillights bouncing across the pasture road behind the property. Not professionals. Professionals don't panic. I stood still for a moment, listening to the quiet settle back into place. Then I swept the flashlight across the barn interior. File cabinets open. Survey folders dumped across the floor. Old reservoir maps trampled into the dirt. They hadn't stolen tools. They hadn't touched the tractors. They came for the documents. Harold appeared in the doorway, wearing boots and his ranch coat over pajama pants. He looked at the mess once and sighed heavily. Guess the Holloways finally got desperate. I crouched near the filing cabinet. One folder was missing. The county easement overlays. But then I noticed something else. The loose floorboard beneath the workbench had shifted slightly. Harold saw me looking at it. Help me move the vise. The cast iron bench vise weighed nearly 100 pounds. Together we slid it aside, exposing the warped plank underneath. Harold knelt slowly, pulled the board up, and reached into the hidden compartment beneath the floor. He lifted out a cedar chest wrapped in old canvas. I stared at him. You hid this down here? Your grandfather did. The brass latch clicked open. Inside sat the real history of Mercer Reservoir. Leather engineering journals, original construction ledgers, hand-drawn elevation charts, and resting across the top like something ceremonial sat the old brass gate keys. Harold picked one up carefully. Your grandfather carried these every day for 20 years. I opened one of the journals. Inside were detailed reservoir calculations written in pencil so sharp and clean they looked fresh. Flow rates, spillway stress notes, full pool elevation marks, matching Diane Keller's surveys exactly. Every number lined up. Every measurement confirmed the same truth. The reservoir had never legally changed. One notebook stopped me cold. January 1974, my grandfather had written, "Temporary drought reduction approved. Full easement preserved permanently. Water returns when conditions allow." I looked up slowly. He knew somebody might try this one day. Harold nodded. He knew people forget land faster than land forgets people. Outside, coyotes started howling somewhere beyond the eastern fence line. I flipped through more pages. Inspection notes, federal renewal letters, correspondence with county engineers. Then another name appeared. Russ Holloway. 3 years ago, my stomach tightened. Attached to one notebook was a photocopy of a planning consultation request, signed directly by Holloway Development. The county response clearly warned that the Pinnacle Ridge Basin overlapped the historical Mercer Reservoir flood easement, stamped in red across the bottom. Further legal review recommended prior to construction. I exhaled slowly. They knew everything. Harold lowered himself carefully onto an old stool. People like Russ Holloway always think paperwork only matters if somebody stronger is holding it. My phone buzzed hard against my pocket. "Diane Keller," I answered immediately. "You watching the news?" she asked. "No, you should." I turned on the small television hanging near the tool shelves. A local Montana station filled the screen with drone footage of Pinnacle Ridge. The headline below read, "Questions rise over flood, risks at luxury lake development." Then came the real punch. The station displayed leaked county planning documents, not summaries, the actual documents, including the flood easement warnings, the same ones Russ Holloway signed. The reporter's voice sharpened. Tonight, several homeowners claim they were never informed their cabins sat within the legal footprint of Mercer Reservoir. Harold let out a quiet whistle. "Well," he muttered, "there goes their property value." The report continued. Former buyers were already contacting attorneys. County commissioners refused comment. And Celeste Holloway had declined interview requests after what reporters called an increasingly hostile public dispute with the Mercer family. Then the camera cut briefly to footage of me standing at the spillway earlier that week. Water rights don't die. They wait. The station replayed the clip twice before moving on. Diane spoke again through the phone. "Elias, somebody inside county planning leaked those documents tonight." "Good." "No," she said carefully. "Great. Because now the Holloways can't bury this quietly." I looked down at the engineering journals spread across the workbench. The break-in had failed. Worse for them, it had pushed the whole story into public view. And once the public realized 94 luxury cabins were sitting inside a live reservoir easement, panic was going to spread faster than floodwater. Outside the barn, headlights appeared on the county road again. But this time they weren't security vehicles. They were news vans. By sunrise the next morning, satellite trucks lined the county road outside Mercer Ranch like somebody had spotted gold in the hills. Reporters stood beside tripods aimed directly at the reservoir basin, while drones buzzed overhead, filming the cabins from every angle. And once the aerial footage hit television, everything changed. From above, the truth looked undeniable. 94 luxury cabins sitting directly below the historic waterline markers. Old shoreline cuts visible in the surrounding rock. Boat dock remnants half buried in dry mud. The entire development looked less like a neighborhood and more like a town somebody accidentally built in the bottom of a drained lake. I stood near the barn fence while reporters shouted questions from beyond the cattle guard. Mr. Mercer, did developers knowingly hide flood records? Are you planning to reopen the reservoir immediately? Have homeowners been warned? I answered carefully. I warned the HOA repeatedly. The legal records speak for themselves. That clip aired statewide before noon. And by 2 o'clock, panic hit Pinnacle Ridge. Moving trucks started appearing near the western basin cabins first, then trailers. Contractors quietly removed patio furniture and generators, while homeowners argued in driveways, holding printed copies of county records downloaded from the news station website. Meanwhile, Celeste Holloway went on television. Big mistake. She appeared live outside the Pinnacle Ridge clubhouse, wearing a white coat and enough makeup to survive a hurricane. This entire situation, she announced, is being manipulated by Elias Mercer, a disgruntled rancher abusing environmental law to terrorize innocent residents. The reporter beside her asked the question that destroyed her. Mrs. Holloway, did your development receive county flood easement warnings before construction began? Celeste froze for half a second. That half second became the entire story. We received routine planning paperwork, like every developer does. Did you disclose those warnings to homeowners? That information was irrelevant, because Mercer Reservoir has been dry for decades. The reporter held up a document directly on camera, signed by Russ Holloway, stamped by county planning. Further legal review recommended prior to construction. Celeste's face lost all color. That clip spread across Montana by dinner. By evening, Diane Keller's phone was exploding with calls from homeowners demanding representation. Several claimed their sales agents had promised permanent waterfront access and guaranteed the reservoir could never legally return. One retired couple from Idaho had spent their entire savings on Cabin 11. Another family from Denver had just finished building a custom guest house 6 feet below legal pool elevation. The anger inside Pinnacle Ridge started turning inward, fast. At 7 that night, a homeowner named Brian Keating knocked on my front door, carrying a folder full of sales paperwork. I need to know the truth, he said immediately. I invited him inside. Harold sat quietly at the kitchen table, while Brian spread contracts across the wood surface with shaking hands. Look at this, he said. They guaranteed reservoir stability. Diane, who had driven up from Bozeman that afternoon, read through the papers carefully. Then she looked up slowly. They never disclosed the active easement. Brian swallowed hard. What does that mean? It means, Diane said calmly, you may have purchased property under fraudulent omission. The room went silent. Brian stared at the documents like they'd turned into snakes. My wife thought we were buying retirement property. Harold finally spoke from the far side of the kitchen. You bought inside a lake, son. Brian left 20 minutes later, looking physically sick. He wasn't the last. By midnight, 3 more homeowners had come to the ranch asking questions the HOA no longer wanted to answer. Then the lawsuits started. A Bozeman law firm announced a homeowner class action investigation against Holloway Development just before midnight news broadcasts. The story hit every station in Montana before sunrise. And somewhere inside Pinnacle Ridge, Celeste Holloway realized the reservoir wasn't the biggest threat anymore. The homeowners were. The next morning, I drove past the development entrance on my way to inspect the spillway gauges. Half the community message boards had already been ripped down. One read, "We were lied to." Another, "Who knew about the easement?" Outside the clubhouse, Celeste stood screaming at 2 board members while contractors quietly removed Pinnacle Ridge sales banners behind her. The image almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. Then my phone rang. Diane, emergency hearing scheduled, she said immediately. 3 days from now. Who filed? The HOA. They're asking the county judge to block reservoir restoration. I looked out across the basin. Workers were loading furniture into trailers under gray morning light. Families finally understood what sat beneath their homes. Not dirt, not empty land, water. And in 3 days, a judge was going to decide whether the truth could finally come back. The courtroom was packed before 9. Homeowners filled every bench, whispering over paper folders and coffee cups. Reporters stood along the back wall. Celeste Holloway sat at the front beside 3 attorneys, dressed in navy blue, hands folded like she was the victim of a tragedy she hadn't built herself. Diane Keller placed one thin binder on our table. Across from us, the HOA attorneys stacked 6 boxes. I leaned toward her. That all you brought? She didn't look up. Truth travels light. Judge Miriam Cole entered at 9:03, and the room snapped quiet. She was in her 60s, silver hair, plain black robe, no patience wasted on theater. The HOA moved first. Their lead attorney argued that restoring Mercer Reservoir would create irreparable harm to innocent homeowners. He spoke about families, retirement savings, children, investments, property values. Behind him, Celeste nodded at every word like she was hearing scripture. Then he pointed at me. This is not routine dam operation, Your Honor. This is retaliatory flooding. A murmur rolled through the room. Judge Cole looked at Diane. Response? Diane stood slowly. No one is flooding anything unlawfully, she said. Mercer Reservoir is returning to its recorded operational elevation after expiration of a federal drought variance. The HOA is asking this court to force my client to permanently abandon legally recorded reservoir rights for the benefit of structures built inside the reservoir footprint. She opened the binder. Not 6 boxes, 1 page at a time. First, the 1951 flood easement, then the 1974 drought variance, then every 10-year renewal, then the clause that ended the argument before it had really begun. Upon expiration, reservoir shall automatically return to federally recognized operational pool elevation. Judge Cole read it twice. The HOA attorney tried to interrupt. Your Honor, the human cost, the judge cut in, does not erase recorded property rights. The room went dead still. Diane then entered the county planning warning signed by Russ Holloway, the one recommending legal review before construction. A homeowner in the second row whispered, "They knew." Another answered, "Oh my God." Celeste turned sharply, but she couldn't stop the sound spreading behind her. Diane continued. The development was warned. The HOA was warned. The homeowners were not. That sentence shifted the whole room. For the first time, the anger in the benches stopped pointing at me. It turned toward Celeste. Her attorney stood again, voice tighter now. The HOA requests at minimum a temporary injunction pending appeal. Judge Cole looked down at the documents, then back at Celeste. Mrs. Holloway, did Pinnacle Ridge HOA disclose the active flood easement to all cabin purchasers? Celeste's face went pale. Her attorney touched her sleeve. She didn't answer. Judge Cole didn't need her to. At 10:41, she issued the ruling. The court finds no legal basis to prevent Elias Mercer from operating Mercer Reservoir at its recorded full pool elevation. No homeowners association may convert a temporary drought condition into permanent private ownership of a reservoir basin. The gavel came down once. Not hard, but it sounded final. Outside the courthouse, light snow fell over the steps while reporters rushed toward both sides. Celeste pushed through them without speaking. One homeowner shouted her name, then another. By the time she reached her SUV, half the crowd was yelling. Diane and I walked out last. Deputy Shane Walker waited near the sidewalk with his hat in his hands. County will secure the dam access road at sunrise, he said. Judge signed the order. I looked past him toward the mountains. The reservoir basin sat beyond them, still dry, still holding 94 cabins and 3 years of lies. Diane handed me the certified copy of the ruling. "You have authorization," she said. I folded the paper carefully and put it inside my jacket. That night I drove home in silence. Harold was waiting on the porch under his wool blanket, watching the dark outline of the basin below the ridge. "Well," he asked, "we open at sunrise." He closed his eyes for one slow second. Then he nodded. Behind the house, locked in the old gatehouse cabinet, my grandfather's brass key was waiting. I barely slept. By 4:30 the next morning, trucks were already moving along the county road below the ranch. Headlights crawled through the dark toward the reservoir basin, while local news helicopters circled overhead like slow-moving insects. The entire valley knew what was about to happen. I drove Harold to the dam just before sunrise. Deputy Shane Walker had county barricades set up along the spillway road, and sheriff deputies stood near the gatehouse, keeping residents back from the control structures. Nobody was shouting anymore. That was the first thing I noticed. The anger had burned itself out overnight. Now the basin felt quiet, heavy. People stood wrapped in coats along the ridge overlooking the cabins below. Some homeowners watched silently beside packed trailers and moving trucks. Others stared at the reservoir floor like they were trying to imagine water where they had only ever seen dirt. Diane Keller stood near the spillway railing, holding a thermos of coffee. "You ready?" she asked. "No," I admitted. She smiled faintly. "Good. Means you understand the weight of it." Harold stayed seated in the passenger side of the truck for a while before stepping out slowly with his cane. Deputy Walker helped him to a folding chair overlooking the basin. He looked smaller than usual under the wool blanket wrapped around his shoulders, but his eyes stayed fixed on the old dam gates, the same gates his father built. By 6 o'clock, reporters were broadcasting live from the ridge. The words "historic water rights dispute" rolled across television banners, while drones filmed the basin from above. Somewhere behind the cameras, homeowners argued quietly with insurance adjusters and attorneys, and still the cabin sat there, waiting. At 6:17, Celeste Holloway arrived. White SUV, dark sunglasses. Two attorneys following behind her, carrying folders they already knew wouldn't matter anymore. She marched toward the gatehouse until Deputy Walker stepped into her path. "You can't cross the barrier, Mom. I'm a board president. You're outside the restricted zone." Her voice rose instantly. "This entire operation is illegal." Diane stepped beside me calmly. "The court order says otherwise." Celeste looked at me over the barricade. "You're enjoying this." I shook my head once. "No, I warned you." For a second her expression shifted. Not rage, fear, because now she could finally see what everybody else saw. The county wasn't stopping me. The court wasn't stopping me. And the reservoir itself had already won before she ever built her first cabin. At 6:42, Deputy Walker checked his watch and nodded toward the gatehouse. "County authorization is active." I walked inside alone. The control room smelled like oil, dust, and cold metal. Original engineering plates still lined the walls beside faded flood charts drawn by my grandfather's hand. The old mechanical wheel sat in the center of the room beneath the release assembly, waiting exactly where he left it. I slid the brass key into the control housing. The lock clicked immediately. Outside, the crowd went completely silent. I could hear the faint buzz of helicopter blades. Overhead then, I wrapped both hands around the wheel release wheel and turned. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then, deep beneath the concrete, ancient machinery groaned awake. The spillway gates began to move. A vibration rolled through the dam floor under my boots while warning lights flickered across the old control panel. Beyond the spillway wall, the feeder channels opened fully for the first time in decades. Water surged through the upper tributaries almost immediately. Not violently, steadily, like something returning home. Outside, people moved toward the ridge rails, watching the first narrow stream spread across the dry basin floor. By 8 o'clock, The lower channels carried enough water to reflect sunlight. By noon, Cabin 3 sat surrounded on 3 sides. Homeowners started loading vehicles faster after that. One man backed a trailer directly through decorative HOA fencing, trying to escape the western access road before the mud softened. Another abandoned patio furniture entirely and drove off without speaking to anyone. But the water kept coming, slow, cold, patient. At sunset, the first porch steps disappeared beneath the rising reservoir. The crowd along the ridge stayed silent, watching it happen. No cheering, no celebration. Only truth arriving inch by inch. I stood beside Harold near the overlook while the last light faded across the water. He watched the reservoir quietly for a long time. Then he spoke without looking at me. "Your grandfather used to say water always remembers where it belongs." Down below, Cabin 12 lost power as the water line reached the electrical boxes. Darkness spread across part of Pinnacle Ridge, and somewhere behind us, inside the crowd gathered on the ridge, I heard homeowners beginning to scream at Celeste Holloway. By sunrise the next morning, the reservoir had risen another 18 inches. Cabin 12 sat dark and half-flooded. Water pressed against porch railings across the western basin, while abandoned golf carts and patio chairs floated slowly through what used to be HOA walking trails. The television helicopters came back early. This time they weren't filming a legal dispute. They were filming collapse. Homeowners crowded outside the Pinnacle Ridge clubhouse demanding answers, while sheriff deputies stood near the entrance, trying to keep the situation from turning into chaos. Several residents carried copies of the county flood documents. Others carried sales contracts with highlighted promises circled in red marker. Permanent waterfront access, protected lakefront investment, guaranteed basin stability. Every lie looked smaller once water touched it. I stood near the spillway with Diane Keller, watching another line of moving trucks crawl out of the basin road. "They'll keep trying to blame you," she said. "Doesn't matter anymore." She nodded toward the clubhouse across the reservoir. "No, now they blame each other." That afternoon, Gallatin County officially opened a fraud investigation into Holloway development. News stations reported that multiple planning disclosures had been withheld during cabin sales. By evening, state licensing officials announced emergency reviews of Russ Holloway's development permits. Then came the arrests. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just quiet deputies walking into the Pinnacle Ridge clubhouse during an emergency board meeting while cameras rolled outside. Celeste Holloway came out first. No sunglasses this time. No speech. No confidence. Just handcuffs and a face finally stripped clean of certainty. Reporters shouted questions as deputies escorted her toward the patrol vehicle. "Mrs. Holloway, did you knowingly hide the flood easement? Did the HOA misuse resident funds? Did you authorize suppression of county records?" She never answered. Behind her, homeowners began yelling. Some angry, some heartbroken. One older man simply stood beside the patrol car, holding a soaked folder of property documents against his chest, like he still couldn't believe any of it was real. The reservoir kept rising. 3 days after the spillway reopened, nearly every cabin below the historical waterline sat partially underwater. Roof reflections shimmered across the new lake surface, while only upper decks and chimneys remained visible in the deeper sections. Nature had reclaimed the basin exactly the way the old surveys said it would. Slowly, legally, completely. Russ Holloway disappeared for almost a week before finally surrendering his developer license through attorneys in Helena. The homeowner lawsuits multiplied faster than anyone could count. Insurance companies refused several claims after reviewing the flood easement disclosures. Pinnacle Ridge Estates stopped existing long before the paperwork officially dissolved. The signs came down first, then the security gates, then the HOA itself. Winter settled in before the legal mess finally quieted enough for the valley to breathe again. By spring, Mercer Reservoir sat full for the first time in nearly 50 years. Cold blue water stretched beneath the mountains where dust and lawsuits had lived only months earlier. Trout returned naturally through the feeder channels almost immediately. Ducks nested along the restored shoreline. Old dock posts my grandfather installed decades earlier reappeared just beneath the surface exactly where Harold remembered them. One evening in late May, I walked the shoreline beside my father carrying 2 fishing rods. He moved slower now, but he smiled more. We stopped near the old eastern ridge where Cabin 27 used to stand before removal crews, dismantled everything above legal waterline. Harold cast once into the reservoir. On the 3rd drift he hooked a rainbow trout, not large, but alive, real. He reeled it in carefully while sunlight moved across the restored water behind him. For a long moment he just held the fish there in both hands. Then he released it gently back into the lake. We watched it disappear beneath the surface. "Your grandfather would have liked seeing this," I said quietly. Harold nodded. "He always said the lake wasn't ours," he answered. "We just took care of it for a while." Wind moved across the reservoir, pushing small ripples against the shoreline rocks. No construction noise, no HOA meetings, no fake security patrols. Just water finally sitting where it had always belonged. Months later, Mercer Reservoir officially became part of the Mercer Conservation Trust. The shoreline reopened under protected access agreements for veterans' fishing programs and county school science projects. Diane Keller helped structure long-term easements, guaranteeing nobody could ever redevelop the basin again. The last thing removed from Pinnacle Ridge was the entrance sign. Deputy Shane Walker hauled it away himself. I watched from the spillway while workers loaded the broken wood letters into a county trailer. Pinnacle Ridge Estates. Gone. Below us, the restored reservoir reflected the mountains in deep blue silence. Harold stood beside me with one hand resting on the old spillway rail. "Funny thing about water," he said softly. "What's that? It remembers where it belongs, even when people forget." And for the first time in 50 years, Mercer Lake was finally home again.
I think the real lesson in this story is that some things in life can stay quiet for a long time without ever truly disappearing. That's like Sar's law for the case. Folk got comfortable, they built lands on top of all assumptions, but the record was still there. The boundary was still there, and eventually the two paths away of return slowly and honestly, one inch at a time. That's true for more than land. It's truly for family history, for promises people make, and for the responsibility we carry to protect what was trusted to us. Elias didn't fight with anger. He stayed patient, followed the law, and let the facts speak when the time finally came. And in the end, the most version that someone lost is where something worth preserving was finally restored. If this story means something to you, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. Type what remembers if you believe some things are worth standing your ground for, no matter how long it takes. And if you ever deal with the HOA, property dispute, or a piece of family land that carry history with it, share your story too. And if you enjoy this story about quiet courage, land rights, and everyday people standing fight with dignity, go ahead and subscribe. There's another story waiting for you right around the bend.